Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, another really fascinating guest for you today, involved in, as we say, creating a better tomorrow, and that's also a motto of their company as well. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. James Murphy, who is Director of Research and Science at British American Tobacco. There he plays a really central role in leading their organization's research and development programs, supporting their company's commitment to reducing the health impacts of their businesses, and offering consumers a range of alternative reduced risk tobacco and nicotine products. And in this role, Dr. Murphy leads the global research and science team, focused on world-class science and best practices applied to all aspects of BAT's work, to ultimately deliver scientific evidence that supports the new categories in their business. He's played a significant role in the development of their new categories over the years, including their first vapor launches, as well as head of reduced risk substantiation. And he brings 2 decades of experience and has held a number of senior roles in R&D, operations, and marketing at BAT. Was most recently executive vice president of the U.S. Scientific Research and Development Group based in Winston-Salem. Dr. Murphy comes to us with a bachelor's in chemistry from Queen's University in Belfast. He did his PhD in synthetic organic chemistry and polymer chemistry at University of Edinburgh, and then went on to do postdoc work in synthetic organic chemistry and polymer chemistry at Nara Institute of Science and Technology in Japan. A lot of really interesting themes to get into today. Honored to have him. Dr. James Murphy, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you very much, Ira. Lovely to be here and great to speak with you today.
It's great having you. Really interesting themes that we don't normally get into on the show, but looking forward to discussing a range of topics. Would love to start off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor a little bit, just to talk a little bit more and introduce yourself. Take us, James, if you wouldn't mind, back to the beginning, your interest in chemistry, in polymer chemistry, and if you can maybe take us up to 2004-ish when you did your PhD in these really complex polymers, this rump technology, which I was able to glean from your PhD was a really good way of getting rid of some nasty normal processes in organic chemistry that we don't have to deal with hazardous waste and byproducts. Interesting theme that we'll be getting into, but take us down that path if you would.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. So as you said, Ira, so I'm a chemist by training, and I was very fortunate to get a slot in Edinburgh University in their PhD program to do a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry and polymer chemistry. This then prompted, I think, which is probably one of the most formative experiences in my life, my career anyway, when I got the opportunity then to build off that and to go to Japan to do postdoctoral studies. And what we were trying to do there was actually trying to create some novel drug delivery systems. So drugs are typically hydroscopic, so they don't really dissolve well in water. So you need sort of novel systems to deliver them more efficaciously, and so as the dose is delivered in a safe and effective manner. And so what we were trying to do was to build these polymers that half was sort of hydrophilic, so water loving, half was hydrophobic, so sort of water hating in sort of layman's terms. And whenever you put these into water, you form these core shell structures, and you could put the drug in the middle of the core. So you could administer that to the patient, and then in the body it would break apart, and then the drug would be delivered at much more significant doses than just delivered, say, like in an oral formulation. So that was really interesting. One for this from the science, but I think also really formative in terms of I had a wonderful boss in Japan. He had just come back from doing postdoctoral studies in MIT in a Nobel Prize winning lab. Very famous professor. He was working for a very famous professor, Dick Schrock, who won Nobel Prize back in, I think it was sort of like the sort of early 2010s, along with Grubbs and Chauvin. And when he came back, and it was his first professorial appointment, and just the strategic planning, the work ethic, the quality of research that's needed to succeed. I think they were really formative years for me.
Excellent. And obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about the tobacco industry and nicotine and so forth. But I took a look, and as you were doing your PhD and diving into the world of polymer chemistry, you spent time at various internships at EXO and at BASF. Just say a couple of words. Obviously, you were at the core of sort of drug delivery technologies, and you were in the chemical industry. What made you think and segue into tobacco?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So when I was in Japan, I wanted to come back to Europe, and sort of I was then with my my sort of future wife. So we wanted to go back to Europe and establish our life together in Europe. And I applied for several graduate management positions in a whole variety of different companies. And BAT was actually really interesting, because I came for the interview, and I was walking around the R&D, and if I'm brutally honest, it was at that stage it was relatively sort of low key in terms of, it was a one category company. It was combustible cigarettes, and they had four departments. They had leaf blending, they had papers, they had filters, and they had chemistry. But I was inspired by my previous boss, my predecessor in the role I'm in at the minute, Dr. David O'Reilly. And they had a mission statement back then, and that was 2005, when they wanted to be the first company to produce a lower risk tobacco product. Right. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating, because obviously I knew lots of people who smoked. My parents smoked. I had lots of relations who smoked, and I was aware of the death and disease around tobacco, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing actually if we could do something in this space where we could actually make safer tobacco products, and what the sort of global potential could be in that there. So that was really the spark that caught me in order to sort of join BAT.
Excellent. And yeah, and so you joined BAT, and the first several years, as you were just mentioning, you're in these roles in developing and characterizing and evaluating all these prototypes that go from, okay, we got combustible over here, we go to modified combustible, heat not burn, into smokeless, and things around 2014 sort of culminate with this really interesting paper, and we'll get into harm reduction in a bit, but the topic was approaches for the design of reduced toxicant emission cigarettes. And here you take the reader into all sorts of technologies, from the filters to interesting charcoal technologies, into this technique called split tipping, which I had to learn about in reading that. Talk a little bit about what you learned up until 2014, because I think this is important and where we're ultimately going.
Yeah, no, again, really formative years around, would it be possible to make a safer cigarette? That was really the strategic ambition of the company back in those days. And what we tried to do, we tried to really take every single element of the cigarette and say, could we modify it in order to try and reduce the toxicant burden, which is the harmful chemicals that are in cigarette smoke. We had blend technologies where we were washing the tobacco with enzymes that are commonly used in washing powders to break down proteins. We had non-tobacco chalk-based glycerol sheets, which were like diluents to dilute the smoke. Yep. We had longer filters that could have more additives in them in terms of like charcoal to remove vapor phase toxicants. The split tipping was around ventilation. So whenever you puff on a cigarette, the ventilation actually goes down, so the smoke that you get is more concentrated. With split tipping, regardless of how hard you puff, the ventilation level stayed the same, so you continue to dilute the smoke. So you added all these technologies together, and actually we did see, around about a sort of 30 to 40% reduction in some of the harmful chemicals in the smoke. We did some clinical work where we saw that whenever smokers switched to these modified cigarettes, their exposure to the harmful chemicals went down. But whenever we did these longer-term clinical studies that looked at disease-relevant endpoints, we didn't see any changes. And then that's when we really made the conclusion that actually, when you combust tobacco, you don't reduce the toxicant burden sufficiently to have a disease-relevant change. And that's what made us make the switch to non-combustible smokeless products.
And then I appreciate that, because then come 2014, you take on an entirely new role. You're as head of biosciences, and here I'd have to say, if you put your job description on the table, I would think, you're running toxicology or whatever in a major pharmaceutical company, but you're doing preclinical assessments in silico and pharmacokinetics and all sorts of computational modeling. The oral products come into the portfolio, so you're involved in sort of the regulatory and scientific engagement there, and then again, publishing a range of really cool studies, things like looking at the biomarkers over a period of a year in people that smoke or don't smoke or switch. Again, looking at pharmacokinetics, dynamics. Talk about this, because again, you started off, thinking pharmaceuticals, and you're doing a lot of very pharmaceutical-looking stuff at this point of your career.
Yeah, great. Well, that was really the early stages of what we've broadly been known as a life sciences department today, and that's really going through everything from laboratory assessment into clinical studies and then into population-based studies. So what we were trying to do there was to say, well, if we take heated tobacco for an example, if we're heating and not combusting, are the amount of emissions lowered? Yes, they are, by about 90%. So you got about 10% the toxicant burden you have in a cigarette with heat not burn. Then if you go into toxicology studies, is the toxicology changing? And yes, actually, then that was following probably 90 to 95% reduction. So you're only about sort of 5 to 10% of the toxicological burden with a heat not burn versus a cigarette. You go into the clinical work, you see that importantly, you can deliver nicotine in the same amounts, because you need these products to be satisfying, otherwise smokers won't switch. But at the same time, you saw the biomarker exposure reducing substantially. So what we were actually seeing in some of those biomarker exposure study was that smokers who switched to heated tobacco, or smokers who quit all nicotine products, so they stopped using all products, both of those outcomes had similar levels of biomarkers. So you could make the conclusion that if a smoker switched to heated tobacco, they were having the same outcomes as people who quit smoking altogether. And that was really important, because the epidemiology of smoking cessation is well known as being very beneficial. So, quality of life improved, disease risk reduced, etc. So those early stage studies that we'd done were vitally important to substantiating that these products could be low risk, but also building, huge confidence in the company that we were on the right track to deliver these sort of lower risk profile products.
And just what you were just mentioning, in terms of, at the end of the day, we need to satisfy consumers with these products. And, I also found it interesting because you had this other study that you did, you published, I think, in 2022. This was a randomized study looking at, again, sort of traditional nicotine replacement therapy products, which, I remember from the early days being in the pharmaceutical industry when they first came out, looking at some of these alternatives that you were looking at. And again, I think that's something we can't overlook, that there is still a base of folks here that want to be satisfied by a product. Yeah. Say a couple words about what you learned in terms of nicotine replacement work you were doing.
Yeah, and if I was to break it down into simple terms, why do people smoke? There's a sensorial aspect, there's a ritualistic aspect, there's a pharmacological aspect. So sensory is all around, the taste and the mouthfeel and that consumer product interaction. The ritual is all about the puffing, inhaling, holding, etc. And the pharmacological side is the nicotine effects. And really that's the key is, and we found this as we've been developing products over the last 10 years, is that if you don't meet those three criteria, you're not going to have a successful product. And that's why you find today, today there's around about 100 million people using what we call next generation products, which are, vaping products, vapor products, or nicotine pouch products. And consumers are using these here because they meet in one shape or form each of those three dimensions. So that's why it's absolutely critical when you go into approaching the design of these devices. If you want to switch smokers into these lower risk products, they have to be satisfying products for consumers.
So yeah, let's transition from there into the new mission, which I'm just reading from the website. Strategic aim to actively migrate smokers from cigarettes to smokeless products and build a so-called smokeless world and smokeless business by the year 2035. Major initiative. Before we get into this part of what you're sort of overseeing now and the tobacco harm reduction, say a couple words, about what we know about nicotine as a substance in 2024, because clearly what we're dealing with today and what the Indo-Americans were using 3,000 years ago for ceremonies, it's been a major transition.
Yes.
What do we know about nicotine today, and maybe say a word about everything else, because there's thousands of bioactive substances in solanaceous plants. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, no, listen, this era is really, one of the most fundamental areas, that we need agreement on between all stakeholders in the whole world of tobacco harm reduction. In that, nicotine is a very, very well studied molecule, and where we are today is, I would say, look at what the major public health bodies around the world are saying. So if I take sort of like some of the bodies that are based in the UK here, there's some fabulous information from the NHS, National Health Service here in the UK, around who should use nicotine, who should not use nicotine. So it's for adult smokers. It's not for pregnant women, lactating women. It's not for people with heart risks or heart problems. It's not the cause of smoking related disease. It's the harmful chemicals that arise from the burning of tobacco. There's so much powerful clarity and guidance around nicotine from NHS. There's the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, Public Health England, Royal College of Physicians. Even in where you're from, with the FDA, have made very clear statements around nicotine in the past. But one of the biggest challenges we have is that even with the medical profession, you see a whole variety of different surveys where up to 80% of physicians believe that nicotine causes cancer. And these are the people who are advising, smokers on how to move forward. And so we really need that community and others to give smokers clear information on the safety of nicotine, to let them make informed decisions that actually it's probably better if they switch to a non-combustible product rather than smoking. The public health impact is absolutely profound. If I could just take a moment to tell you about Sweden, for example. So in Europe, there's the 2040 Beat Cancer Plan that the European Union is sponsoring. And what the European Union wants to achieve is that all countries have a 5% smoking rate, 5%. So they say that a 5%, it's pretty much a non-smoking country, because you're always going to have some of these incalcitrant smokers who just will never quit, who are maybe in their sort of 50s, 60s, 70s. So Sweden exited last year at 2023 at a smoking rate of 5.6%. So this year, at some stage, they're going to hit the 5%. So Sweden will be smoke-free a full 16 years ahead of the Beat Cancer Plan. But in Sweden, over 70% of the market is using these non-combustible products like snus, which is the tobacco pouch you put under your lip, or modern oral nicotine pouches, or vaping. Sweden has the lowest incidence of lung cancer mortalities in the whole of the EU. And if you could apply the mortality rates of Sweden across the EU, you would save 3.5 million lives in the next 10 years. So these are really profound solutions that we have in our hand if we can get all stakeholders to buy into them.
And those are clearly desired outcomes. You were just mentioning, talking about the World Health Organization and data, and we have CDC data here and so forth. What are the desired outcomes in terms of just harm reduction from BAT? Because clearly, you're sort of putting yourself out of one business. But take us to 2035. What do you really want to see in terms of harm reduction as we get to that horizon that is in your strategic plan?
Yeah, I know it's a great question, and it's not unlike some of the other big global companies who have a legacy product that they're trying to turn into a legacy combustion product. They're trying to turn into a non-combustible product. Think automotive, think fuel. The approach inside BAT, I imagine, is not very different to what happens in like an Exxon or a Shell or one of the major automotives, a Mercedes or a BMW, where we have a legacy product. We know that there's a better future in the non-combustible products, and what we would like to see is, one, I think first and foremost is around the world today, 8 million deaths attributable to smoking-related diseases. That the solutions are there in our hands today if we can get all stakeholders to support them, to significantly reduce that burden that tobacco currently has, combustible tobacco has on society. I think then on the other side, if I go to a country like Sweden, where today, if you look at the sort of metrics, so one, the health impact of our tobacco business in Sweden is probably the lowest in the world because people are using the non-combustible products. BAT actually makes more money in its non-combustible business than it does in cigarettes in Sweden. And then you have the health outcomes for the Swedish nation as a whole. So there's a whole, for me, a win-win-win for society, for government, for public health, but also for BAT as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just while I have it, I've always wondered. It's interesting. I'm sitting here on the U.S. East Coast, and a couple of miles from where I live right now is a company called McAndrew and Forbes, which was one of the largest importer of licorice in the United States. And I come to learn licorice is one of the important flavor extenders of these products and so forth. I was just interested in sort of the flavor dynamic here, because clearly, we were talking about we want desirable products, obviously. What has been the role? Because we know of menthol cigarettes, but in terms of just the role of flavor in all this, in terms of satisfying, what this consumer need is all about.
Yeah, and this is another really important question, where I think effective dialogue with all the stakeholders can really, clarify this area and a win-win solution. So what we have is a whole series of studies, us and many others as well, and even the PATH survey in the US, which is the FDA's public health survey on tobacco use. It clearly shows that flavored vapor products, for example, are more effective at switching smokers than, say, tobacco flavors. So that could be flavors like fruits or beverage. Now, so that's I think there's really robust scientific substantiation that flavors are effective at switching smokers. Where the problem and the challenge lies today is the fact that there are, I think, a whole series of irresponsible manufacturers who are now creating a whole range of products that are youth attracting, and that's then counterbalancing the positive nature of tobacco harm reduction. And so we went out in the UK just before Christmas last year with a very clear guidance on things like flavors, where we were saying what we need is effective lists of there's tobacco flavors, mint, menthol, fruits, that they're effective at switching out smokers, so that should be the domains for flavors. There's no place for confectionery, these other ridiculous flavors, unicorn juice, and this sort of nonsense. There's absolutely no place for that there in what is an adult environment. things like the product descriptors, again, it should be very clear. It should be, menthol with maybe a descriptor or berry with a descriptor. Again, there's no need for these silly made up descriptors. And then even the format, it should just be a simple device. It doesn't need to be shaped like you see some really irresponsible stuff like Xbox consoles and things like this here. So I think with quite clear guidelines from regulators and enforcement, I think we can really make an effective domain for flavors, descriptors, and product formats that's really focused on switching adult smokers, and then to move away and ban a lot of this youth-oriented materials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. While we're on this topic,
Yeah.
I have to ask, because a big part of and again, we'll put the link to this in the bio of the show, but in terms of your sort of beyond nicotine focus within the science portfolio, clearly people are smoking other things nowadays. I don't know how many states in the United States now cannabis is now legal. This is something that you're focusing on, and somebody probably other versions in terms of vapor products, and it was interesting. I saw something on this interesting company you're working with now on called Organigram.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because obviously, you spend a lot of time looking at tobacco and nicotine and all the interesting pharmacological diversity there. Talk about some of these other beyond nicotine products, and a little bit of how that has been crafting your R&D plan.
Oh, very good. So we look at what we call our beyond nicotine strategy, a new engine of innovation for us, where there's two main streams in that there. So the first being well-being stimulation, and the second one being in the area of cannabis. So in the well-being stimulation area, BAT is really a fast-moving consumer good company, really in the sense of how it operates and the markets, etc. Really not that much different from a Unilever or a Procter, albeit in a different sort of industry space. So with all of our consumer knowledge and insights, all our product development and innovation insights, all of our distribution and market access, we really see that some of these adjacencies in the well-being space. So we launched a product called Ride in Australia and Canada last year. So these are shot products that have these different stacks of different well-known actives. So sort of mixes of caffeine and theanine for focus, boost, energy, etc. So we really see an opportunity in there for us in that well-being space. And the cannabis is for us, it's a bit longer term. As you were saying, it's already legal in a number of states. For us, we won't move into cannabis in the United States until it's federally regulated. There's a number of challenges around cannabis, and we just want to see how it will be regulated by the FDA or others whenever it gets regulated. So today, what we want to do is very much in the research and development in the learning space. So that's when we went in to the partnership with Organigram, took a small share in Organigram. We have a small product development center based out in Moncton, and what we're doing there is doing some early stage product development. Some scientific studies to understand things like the chemistry, the toxicology, the pharmacokinetics, some of the use behavior. So as whenever the time comes that it's right to get into the cannabis business, that we're ready with some products and some very, very robust science.
Let's talk a little bit about what I guess I'll call nicotine or tobacco adjacent, because a couple careers ago for myself, I was in the ag biotech business, and I was involved in a company that was doing so-called molecular farming, and we were using tobacco as a way to produce hepatitis B surface antigens and all sorts of other cool pharmacological moieties. I know that BAT, I think it used to be RJ Reynolds, but has this Kentucky bioprocessing where you played around with coronavirus vaccines, as an inexpensive production system. Talk about a little bit about the adjacent stuff, because obviously tobacco does do a lot of cool things for us, whether a biopharmaceutical production system. Years ago, nicotinic receptor drugs were, all the rage, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. But these receptors do interesting pharmacological things for us all. take us into that space, if you would.
Yeah, no problem. For me, I mean, this is a fascinating space. You know, the sort of biotech, biologic space, and I think the first thing, you know, when sort of someone who's not familiar in the area thinks, oh, you're putting something in tobacco. This is a sort of a distant cousin of the tobacco that's put into cigarettes. It's benzodiazepine rather than nicotinia. But these plants, as you rightly said, and you've got experience in there. These plants can be magnificent factories for novel biologics. So what we're looking at now is a whole series of different proteins and monoclonal antibodies that could have therapeutic or could have other applications, bioingredients, even maybe in the food or additive space. You know, one of the things that's really interesting, you just touched on it there about the molecular farming, is that, you know, when you get into that controlled environmental agriculture and vertical towers and stuff, you start to see that actually, you know, you could go to different parts of the world where there's not lots of rain and there's not the great conditions you have in, say, like a Tennessee or a Kentucky for growing these sorts of plants, where you could actually produce really novel compounds locally that could have you know, a huge impact in those countries. So that's something that we're doing. As you said, it's an adjacency. I think it's a great learning. It continues to be a great learning experience for us. You know, we always want to learn more and more about the tobacco plant. And let's see in the future, you know, there could be an opportunity that where we land on some therapeutics that, if they could have a benefit for society, we'd be very much willing to you know, do something in that space.
Excellent. Yeah, I've always been interested in the connection. Obviously, you know, in a smokeless world where, okay, we don't need these tobacco farmers anymore, you know, and they don't want to grow corn or soybeans or whatever. There are these, you know, much higher value opportunities. So I've always been excited at molecular farming from that perspective. Obviously, the biotech industry hasn't, you know, adopted it yet, but we've seen some niche opportunities there. So it's been kind of exciting. James, while we have talk a little bit about the your new innovation center, because I think that just came across the wire a couple of days ago. $30 million, no, sorry, 30 million pounds investment into this, where you're going to be looking at everything from the vapor products and nicotine patches to everything else. Say a couple words about this new facility and as part of the Smokeless World initiative.
Yeah, no, it's great. No, thanks, Sarah. And you know, it kind of tells the story of BAT in the last 2 decades. You know, I joined on the Southampton site, which is our global research and development site, 20 years ago. When I joined there was a cigarette factory, and in 2007, when the indoor smoking ban came in and various other things, we closed that factory down. And around 2010, about 2012, we actually remodified that space, which was a factory, to become an innovation center for combustible cigarettes. And as time's moved on and our innovations now moved completely towards non-combustible products, we then redesigned the innovation center again to be focused on innovating in all of the different technologies and capabilities around vapor, heated tobacco, and modern oral, but also in the well-being stimulation. So it's a real sort of signal for me of like how, you know, 20 years ago it was a cigarette company, and now you move on 2 decades and sort of 100% of the innovations focus on smokeless products. You know, we've got about on the site, we've got about 600 scientists working in this here space. So it's really exciting, you know, and the capabilities that we have now and the infrastructure is absolutely fantastic.
James, what else is coming up for 2024 that we should know about? Because clearly you're executing on this plan that we mentioned at the beginning in terms of the 2035 goals. Anything that I missed while we have you across any of these verticals, and then any public-facing initiatives coming up that we should know about in terms of conferences or talks or anything where you're going to be on sort of the public space that we can run into you and meet you possibly or watch you give a talk.
Yeah, so I think a couple of important things this year. Obviously, awaiting the Alto PMTA, that's our vapor products. The decision on that there from the FDA. These are absolutely critical that we get you know, that regulatory verification of these products, so it builds the confidence for consumers. So I think it's a huge year for us. You know, we continue on our journey towards our ambition around trying to get sort of 25 million consumers of in these smokeless products by 2025. You know, we want to have a significant business. We want these new category products to be a significant part of our business. And then the last thing I would just say, sorry, if I can just leave you one last part of this question.
Please.
In the world today, there's 8.1 billion people, and the top 15 countries in the world by population, the 15 top countries by population account for about 65% of the world's population. So you got you got India, you got China, 1.4 billion each, and you start to go down to USA, you got Japan, Ethiopia, other countries. And when you look at these countries where there's the bulk of the world's population now, it's not directly correlated population and smoking incidents.
Mm-hmm.
But you can sort of see that in these top 15 countries, there's only about 40% of them are non-combustible products permitted. So we can only actually get these products into the hands of a limited amount of countries around the world.
Yep.
So that's what we want to see this year. We've got a couple of big ones that we'd really like to. So Mexico, Chile, Brazil, some of these big countries, South America, Africa, Asia, that we really would like to have an acceptance for these smokeless products, and then we can actually have the opportunity for smokers to switch to them.
James, one final question while I have you. Just I was, before I was taking a look, on the BAT website, it lists your bio, but it talks about your personal interest. And, aside from circuit training and skiing and swimming and stuff, it mentions cooking and gardening. What are you gardening nowadays, and any interesting recipes that we should know about? I love gardening myself, and that's why I was just wondering.
I know. I just find it very, very therapeutic. It's
me too.
With the flower beds and cutting the grass and trying to get the lines as accurate as possible. But I'm certainly no expert. I just find I can disconnect, and I find it so relaxing. And the cooking goes back to the chemistry. I love that sort of mixing and trying different things.
Absolutely. No, great stuff, James. I definitely, very much appreciate the story, listening to your journey, what you've been doing and what you're doing now, and where this is all going for 2035, and just, rooting you on, and I will continue to follow your story as you make this smoke-free world happen. For everybody, again, that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks, or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. James Murphy, Director, Research and Science, British American Tobacco. James, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for what you've been doing. And as we like to say on our show, and what your company likes to say as well, thanks for helping to craft a better tomorrow for a lot of people out there via what you do. Really great story.
Thank you very much for the time here. I really appreciate it. Great to speak to you.
Good to speak with you.